Okay, I've written a game design Bible, and I want to talk through it a bit. If you'd asked me kind of around the time that Gunpoint came out, what my formula was for a game, and during Heat Signature too, it would have just been these two. So obvious pleasures and brain food. So probably the most kind of our best known signature is knocking people through windows, right? And that came from just breaking glass is inherently satisfying in real life and in video games, and all it needs, the only implementation work for that is just like the glass, pretty easy. Breaking it, sound effect, bit of particles. The particles in Gunpoint aren't even good. They're not actually particles. They're actual game objects. Bit of a technical point. But what the point is, you need very little actual finesse in making that interaction, because the interaction itself is inherently satisfying. And then knocking people through windows was kind of just the most obvious way to break them, really. Didn't want you to have to shoot them, especially because the whole game was meant to be about guns being a big deal. But that's just one of many things. Heat Signature, you can break windows in that, and that's cool. But it's not as core a part of the game. It's not something you're doing every single level. But whacking people with a wrench is the obvious pleasure in Heat Signature. I think that just always feels good. And we try and have like a few of those. Like that's sort of the bedrock of the game, and they're pretty easy to make those things, and something that's just going to be fun every time you do it. And it matters a lot what it's not all polish, it's not all implementation. As with the Windows example, it matters that the thing is inherently satisfying in itself. It would be satisfying to do in real life, and the more satisfying it would be to do in real life, really the less work you have to put into really capturing that, because it will get through anyway. Obviously, polish is good, but yeah. And then brain food, it was a very generic term for just anything that tingles your brain. Obvious pleasures, if it was just that, you're talking like Candy Crush. I don't want to say Candy Crush has no brain food in it, but there are games where the obvious pleasures are all there is. But actually, the fact that Candy Crush does have more than obvious pleasures is kind of what I'm talking about. It's kind of the point I'm making. You want a little bit more. And for me, something for your brain to think about. It's pretty different in each game. Gunpoint, it's the puzzle solving of the messing around with connections, figuring out how you want to wire the building. Heat Signature, it's much more about sort of the map of the level and what route you're going to take. And I'd say maybe arguably a bit more creative, or it's a bit more player driven in the sense that I didn't design any of the levels. They're all just generated. You figure out a solution. I don't know what the solution is. And then Tactical Breach Wizards is about combining the abilities of your team. You have all these different abilities that are unique to each team member. What order you do them in, which ones to use this turn, which to save for later, how to spend your mana. All this stuff is this. And I've got a little addendum here, which was not part of the thinking for Heat Signature or Gunpoint, but lately I've come up with this term, gut calls, for decisions that are complex enough that there is no hard and fast right answer given the information you have. It's impossible to just say, oh, this is always the right answer given this information. It's too complex a question to answer, and there's too many uncertainties, either randomness or other players' intent or whatever. But they are not so complex or so unknowable or so random that there's nothing to think about. There's a big actual sweet spot zone between those two things, where there's a lot for your brain to chew on, but there's no clear answers. And I think that's the fun part. Board games are really good at this. Most good board games have this in spades. Video games sometimes have it, but it's not necessarily the core. And now that I've zeroed in on that, that is a type of decision that's very juicy. It's very satisfying. My brain loves it. I just want to spend time in that zone. So those are the two I already had. This has got a bit longer, because this really, I've called it Game Design Bible as if it's what we obey for all games. I'm crystallizing this because I'm thinking ahead to what we make next. And this is really a list of, a checklist for the next game. So roguelike format is on here. Like Gunpoint's not a roguelike, Breach Wizards isn't a roguelike, but I put this in Design Bible because for the next game, at least, there's no point in thinking about beyond the next game. I definitely want to make a roguelike. Making a non-roguelike, then a roguelike, then a non-roguelike has really cemented that roguelikes are an incredibly efficient format for a game. The little addendum here is make completability the player's problem. That's just the aspect of roguelikes that especially appeals to me right now. I did a whole video on this. But if you handcraft a game, it is your job as a game designer to ensure the player cannot get permanently stuck, because if they did, it would be such a bad outcome that it doesn't matter, even if it is the player's fault. That sucks so much that it's really your fault, your problem as a game designer. In a roguelike, if you just can't win your run, like you fucked up your deck, it's not great. We don't want a load of outcomes like that, especially if you couldn't have seen it coming. But it is a sort of accepted and common feature for roguelikes that you're not going to win every time, and for you to hit a point in your run where you think, I'm not winning this, this is going south, is normal. It's the player's problem to make it to give themselves a clear runway to victory, and that's fine. It's not a thing that people complain about. Obviously, like my personal taste on this is the moment that you realize you're fucked to the moment your run ends should be as short as possible. I absolutely don't want you to spend a ton of time in the like, I can't win from here, but I guess I got to play it out. But equally, you don't want it to be too sudden. You don't want it to be like you go from I'm definitely going to win this to like it's over. Like that sucks too. So it's about having that arc of like, is this going well? I want something to come together. It's not really coming together. All right, no, I'm dead. You certainly don't want to be like, this is great. This is the best run I've ever had. Oh shit, I'm dead. Slay the Spire does have that actually a fair bit. I don't want to get into it too much. But yeah, there are some roguelikes where like you can go from really riding high to just, just that. This is such a good deck, but I just drew just the wrong cards at just the wrong time with just the wrong enemy that I'm just going to bleed out. And the fact that I went into this fight with like less than on full health is a consequence of the like sacrifices I made to build to this point. And it is sort of your fault, but there are some that feel bad. Anyway, that's one of the things that I like about roguelikes. The main thing I like about roguelikes is just the amount of content you make versus the amount of hours of fun that the end user gets out of it is an incredible ratio, like unparalleled, really. And all the work you put in just pays off again and again and again, and it can combine. And actually, that leads me to this is sort of our signature. This I don't know if I didn't necessarily group it in with brain food and obvious pleasures back in the day, but this has always been part of the suspicious development's kind of DNA. Is combinations that explode in the mind. I think I've sometimes said like we make games about combining things. So Gunpoint, you are connecting the different devices. I just make all the devices. I let you connect them. The combinations then are your work. You can daisy chain things together. You can create these elaborate machines, all of that stuff. Heat Signature is very much about Heat Signature is a left-hand, right-hand game. It's like you get to select something for your left mouse button, something for your right mouse button, and it's like if you want a sidewinder teleport in your right hand and a wrench in your left, that's one build. If you want a silent shotgun in your right hand and a sword in your left, that's a different thing. They're not long-term commitments in Heat Signature. You can absolutely pause and change your build at any time. But they're still, whatever number of these things you combine in a given run, it is about daisy chaining these things. If I do this into that, and then I do this, that happens. And even just combining your abilities with the enemies, it's very much a game where we just build the elements and we let the random generator shuffle them in, combine them, and then you combine your abilities with their threats, and stuff comes out of that. And I phrased it as grasp the elements quickly, never stop seeing new ways to mix them. That's a high goal. Never stop is too high a bar to hit, but it's just a convenient way to phrase it. Like the idea is, it should be really easy to understand the elements, and then how they can combine is you're going to keep discovering. Oh wait, if I had this when I fight this guy, would that work? If I had this and this, couldn't I deactivate his shield and then hit him with this thing? Love that stuff. That is core to everything, and of course Tactical Breach Wizards. That's like the combining abilities game. Just like each unique wizard is kind of offering you some new ingredients, and then which wizards you have with you, and what the challenge is, and what abilities you've unlocked, and how you've upgraded those abilities, all just feed into like the richness of combining those things. In the middle of that, I mentioned the word shuffleable, and so I'm going to skip straight to shuffleable game design, which is a term I kind of came up with for the roguelike talk I did recently. This was explaining like why Heat Signature didn't need a good level generator. The level generator in Heat Signature is very rudimentary in terms of like it's not trying to create a unique, interesting space every time. The layout is not trying to be visually arresting and We're very much not doing the No Man's Sky thing of like, there's infinite planets and every planet is going to wow you and think, whoa, I've never seen this before. It's really just like, here are the elements of the game. All the level generator is going to do is shuffle them. And you can approach game design with that in mind and make sure that the constraints of each ability the player has, or challenge or power that the enemy has, whatever, the constraints and the freedoms that each individual element has, like, relate to the level and the layout and the space. They can relate to distance. They can relate to line of sight. They can relate to pathing. They can relate to position of guards. And then if the constraints and freedoms of each element are different in that way, and then you just shuffle things around, you get new challenges, you get new solutions, you get new stuff. And that's ultimately what ended up working with Heat Signature. That's kind of how it got from this game that was for about 2.5 years kind of promising, which is horrible, and then finally started to click together like, now it's suddenly it's producing moments that make me laugh, it's producing moments that surprise me, it's producing moments that are really cool. And that reminds me of something else on this list that I'm now looking for. Oh no, it's actually just the subtitle of this very thing. Reach the surprise threshold of combinable content. Bit of a jargon heavy sentence, but this is what happened to me at Stugan. This retreat I went on, I reevaluated my priorities with Heat Signature, and I just focused on, let's just add more stuff. It just needs like more item types, more guard types, more defense types, all these different things. Just put more ingredients in the bowl, because it's already stirring these things, but there's not much to stir yet. It's like all we've got is cheese and sugar and one grape. And we just keep recombining those things, and you can try cheese and sugar together and it's not great. You can try grape and sugar together and that's fine. You can try cheese and grapes together and that's all right. But with only 3 elements, you're never going to get like surprising stuff beyond that. And so once you add like 12 elements, suddenly it's like, every time you play, you're like, I've never seen this combination of things before. And these things, click together in cool ways. So that's the surprise threshold. Add enough combinable content that you start to see surprises every time you play. Maybe that's a good springboard into the game being a good vehicle for abilities and upgrades. I guess I'll mention these headings too. Like I've divided into excitement, efficiency, and playability. Efficiency is about how easy the game is to make. And so that's about leaning into our strengths, leaning into stuff that is quick to make. And a thought, this is very Breach Wizard specific. I just recently had a case where I'm trying to think of a new ability for a wizard. We just needed 1 more for him, and I came up with 3 that all kind of worked. They're all pretty good. And we're like, I can't put 3 in. He's already got 3. Having 6 abilities for this guy is just overwhelming. This is a game where the abilities you get are not up to you. The upgrades for them are. You get total freedom over that. But you don't get... It's not like there's 10 abilities available and you pick 5 of them. You just get the abilities because we're hand designing levels, so we need to know whether you can do this or you can't do that. And that means we can't just give one wizard 6 abilities. There just isn't kind of room in the structure, and that's a failing of the structure. It shouldn't. I don't want that to be that case because making abilities is pretty quick and high value for the player. Making upgrades is incredibly quick and incredibly high value to the player for the amount of time it takes us to do them. And so I had this moment of like, I never want to be in this situation again. I only want to make games where every cool ability we can think of, every cool upgrade we can think of, it just goes in there. Just throw it in the fucking bowl. Like, it's all good stuff, and it should just be, the structure of the game should support us just adding as much of it as we can make. And it should all be positive. And that's, roguelikes just naturally do that, really. It's just, it's in the loot table. It's in the list of things that could come up in a given run. Boosts variety, boosts kind of promise. It exponentially boosts combinations, like having this ability with this perk and this perk is, magic. And that might even be one like top of the list of the many, many reasons why the next game has to be a roguelike. I'm just 100% on that. It's the thing I'm most sure of. It's the only thing I'm 100% sure of. Because handcrafting, there's lots of reasons it's costly. I'm tempted to justify why we went with handcrafted stuff for wizards, but I think that's a whole other video. But yeah, next time, definitely roguelike. Okay. Strongly appealing core fantasy is the easiest one to get your head around, I think. I really didn't consciously recognize this as a rule or as a desirable thing until FTL was as big as it was. I knew I loved FTL before it came out, and then it came out and it was huge. and it was pretty clear that part of that success was, the reason it's brilliant. I could have told you all the reasons it's brilliant before it came out, but after it had to come out and do as well as it did for me to understand, for me to think about like, why is it as broadly popular? Because that's not necessarily to do with quality. Does that sound critical? I didn't mean that's a criticism at all. What I'm saying is the broad appeal is very hard to predict. Quality is easy to predict. And I think part of the magic of FTL, the reason it was really touched a nerve, was being a Star Trek captain is something that games have not served well. And the ones to this day, like the ones that do it really, that now serve that fantasy best, are multiplayer games. And that's just hard to get a team together for. So just a little single player game that's pretty understandable. It's not very complex. It's not simulation. It's nice and easy to pick up, and you can just be making the kinds of calls that a Star Trek captain has to make for real. Like it actually matters whether you make this choice one way or the other. That's something that just games hadn't really done before, to my knowledge. And it's a huge core fantasy. It's very appealing, and loads of people want that fantasy. So I think, for me, I want to pick fantasies I'm excited about. Being a private detective in Gunpoint, I'm very into that. Breaking into spaceships in Heat Signature, maybe not such a core fantasy. Like space pirate has never been a particular thing for me, but sci-fi and just the fantasy of like, there's a spaceship out there. It hasn't docked. It's not. I'm not going to raid the spaceship on the ground. I'm going into fucking space. I'm going to break in through a window or an airlock, and I'm just going to get in and sneak through it. It's wildly ambitious. It's audacious, and that appeals to me. So, like, my appeal is going to be based on how much I want to do this fantasy. But now I think a bit more of like, if you're thinking about the commercial potential of a game idea. How many people have that fantasy? Like Heat Signature is maybe not such a broad one. Breach Wizards is an interesting one because I think it's for me, it's a very snappy and sellable idea in the sense that just the title, for some people, you tell them the title and they're just like, oh, I'm in. That sounds great. So it's a strong fantasy in that sense. But it's not like one of those big fundamental core memory fantasies for all nerds. Being a Star Trek captain, being a hotshot space pilot, being I don't know, like a military general. There's some that are very well served, and there are some that are underserved. Breach Wizards is sort of trying to be, and hopefully succeeding at being, a new fantasy. Like you probably haven't sat there thinking, I wish I was a wizard in a Tom Clancy game. but once I say, do you want to be a wizard in a Tom Clancy game? A lot of people will be like, yeah, sure. So that's good. Who knows? It'd be too soon to anyway to comment on how broad that fantasy is, because we're wait to find out how well the game does. Expressive playstyle choices. This can be manifested in lots of different ways. There's lots of different sort of avenues for this, but obviously play style, just how do you approach this level? Do you want to do it stealthily? Do you want to do it non-violently, violently? I think this is definitely core to Gunpoint. It's pretty core to Heat Signature. Breach Wizards maybe less so, in that we don't let you be lethal exactly. There's for various reasons, it just this in the story context, it doesn't make sense to say, hey, do you want to murder everybody? But the expressiveness in Breach Wizards is more about like, which abilities do you love? Which abilities are you going to try and knock everyone out of a window, or are you trying to slam them with damage, or which abilities really click for you and you're like, I want to go big on this and I want to make this the core of my playstyle. And the more expressive, the better here. So for future games, I really want your choices here to be expressing who you are. That's what expressive means. Is you make a choice that. It's not about expressing a thought you just had. It's expressing an identity. It's like in a video game, whether it's actually a role-playing game by name or not, part of the fantasy, part of what we're inviting you to do, to embody, to explore, is going to be an identity. It's like, who do you want to be? Heat Signature is about being a space pirate. It's not just about breaking into spaceships, if that makes any sense. And so how do you want to break into a spaceship? How do you want to go about that? How do you want to approach that? Is going to not just express a preference you have as a gamer, but it should express who you want to be in this world. And actually, Heat Signature, we did something kind of a little bit unusual with this, where each life you're a different person, and then especially with the anniversary update we did, we pushed you to play differently each time. We told you, this person doesn't want to ever kill. This person is on a fucking revenge quest with a sword. They are definitely going to kill. This person, can't use gadgets or passes out if they teleport. We tried to prompt you to play differently with each life. And so that was Heat Signature's big experiment, really. Or one of the most interesting things that I was wanted to explore with it was, yes, people have different playstyle preferences in emergent games and in games that allow that kind of thing. Can we coax you into varying that rather than just the sort of, I guess I don't mean to pick on this game because I love it, but I call it the Prey problem, where like Prey just, it's real fucking long and it's great, and you can be loads of different characters, but you kind of pick one and you stick with it for all of the 35 hours that you're going to be playing the game, and that feels like a waste of its breadth. I think Prey maybe springs to mind because they did the Mooncrash DLC, which is specifically about it, and it does a really good job and a really interesting way of breaking that problem. Anyway, playstyle choices should be expressive. Expressive means it expresses something about who you are playing this time. And that doesn't have to be core to you. It's usually cool if it is core to you. But then I also believe that players have more in them than one person. They can be different kinds of people and explore that. And I want games to validate that and encourage it. Roguelike, shuffleable, good vehicle for writing. I talked about being a good vehicle for abilities and upgrades. Good vehicle for writing. Over the years, I mean, Heat Signature, one of my regrets with that, and it's a hard one to fix, is just that there wasn't a lot of place for me to just put writing into it. I did a little bit of that, but it just didn't naturally fit. And I didn't force it, which is a good thing. I shouldn't have forced it. But for future games, the reason I especially want to get writing in there in a big way, and the reason it's under the efficiency category, is it's just very straightforward. Like, I'm not gonna, I'm not the greatest writer, and I'm definitely not the most versatile writer. I have a voice, and I stick to it. You can recognize my voice pretty easily. Breach Wizards, I'm trying to branch out a bit, and I hope some of the characters sound different to each other. But one reason that you'll hear a very familiar voice in a lot of my writing is that voice comes very easily to me, and writing is very straightforward. And it's not quite that the first draft goes in, but it's not a lot of drafts. It's usually the first draft that's pretty quick, and then I come back to it for a couple of weeks later and play it in context, and I see a bunch of things I want to change. And compared to every other part of game development, that is like miraculously simple. If you can have a game structure that supports, like, there's going to be a conversation here, I'll write the conversation. A little while later, if I'm unhappy with the conversation, I'll tweak the conversation. And that is all of the work I'll ever do on it. That is incredible. That's a gift. Everything else is like, oh, God, this is broken now because we changed this other thing. Oh, God, and there's actually all of my ideas about this make perfect sense on paper, but then when you play them, this doesn't line up with that. And now because we changed this thing breaks. And this thing works perfectly for me. Someone else played it. They had 100% different experience, and it didn't work at all for them. And now we've got to try and find a way to fix it for them without breaking it for me. Like, game development in every other way is such an intricate balancing act, and the writing is the only part of it that for me has gone real smoothly. Where, like, just write something, and usually people like it. And so the key thing here for like coming up with the game concept is writing needs to slot into it. So Heat Signature fails this. There just wasn't a good place to put the writing. Gunpoint really does well on this bit of structure where, well, adding some writing to the game takes a little more than writing it. So in Gunpoint, every mission has a briefing and a debrief. Writing those was a case of writing those and nothing else. If you're talking to a character you've never talked to before, I would need to talk to John to make a portrait for that character. Other than that, no further work. Just write the file, it's done. Breach Wizards, writing the dialogue is pretty easy, but then we need to lay out the scene, and every scene is a custom art thing. It's kind of like a cutscene. And so my artist, John Roberts, has to be heavily involved and has to do a bunch of work for each one of those. And if I want to add a new scene, he has to make a new scene. So it's a bit more expensive. Where Gunpoint's shortcoming, though, was that there was no way to add optional writing, really. There was laptops you could hack, but if I just wanted to add a conversation for flavor, there wasn't a structure for that. That was maybe a positive in the sense that we got the game done much faster than any of my other games. But the downside is I think that the story of that game is a little bit dry in the sense that like the plot is entirely about the machinations of some companies, and there's some interpersonal stuff between those guys, but it has nothing to do with you really, and there isn't a lot of scope for just building up the characters and having the characters matter in terms of the plot, having like your character matter in terms of the plot and someone else's character. Like Breach Wizards is a ensemble cast, and who they are and how they feel about each other and what they're going through is core to the story, and that is partly because it's a much better vehicle for writing. There's loads of places that writing can go. But one of the best things, one of the greatest gifts for that was realizing that like in a breach and clear scenario, right before every time you breach, the characters are standing next to each other and they have some time and they can talk there. And so we have a breach conversation before each level, and that's just been a great place to put little, it follows an interesting thing I've noticed with writing in general in lots of different ways, where in a breach conversation, either I have some important information I want to get across to you, I want to tell you something about the challenge you're about to face. There's going to be a new mechanic and I want to like lead into it a little bit. One of the characters might know something about it. Or I don't. And I have nothing to say at all, but there's still a slot for writing there. And in those situations, I don't want to waste your time too much. They're not going to be long, but sometimes the writing that you're most pleased with is stuff that you did where you had nothing to say. Because I remember like a PC gamer writing the guide to the demo disc that would come with each issue. That used to be my job. And when I was writing that game, I didn't know or care about. Some of that was my best writing. Like, let me tell you about this football game. I can't understand because I don't know football, and I'm just going to write for a while. You definitely want both. You wouldn't want too much of that, but yeah. Broad failure spectrum. I've done a whole thing on failure spectrums before. It means there's a range of outcomes between perfect success and absolute failure. Got to restart the game. You want as many different gradations between that, and the advantage of that is that you can be always on the brink but rarely hit frustration. And so what I mean by that is like Plants vs. Zombies. You're trying to stop all the zombies before they get to your plants at all. If they do get to your plants, they'll start to eat your plants, and they might destroy your plants. I think that's how it works. But until that happens, you're on the brink of that happening, and you feel like that will be failure. But then when it happens, the game doesn't end. You have to restart. You're not pulled out of the game and lose immersion and get frustration. A plant gets eaten, and then if they eat all of your plants, then they get all the way to the end of the thing. And when that's a risk of happening, you're on the brink of it happening. You're really trying to make it not happen. You're having that good like threshold kind of feelings that you get in video games. But if it does happen, that's not the end of the game. A lawnmower goes out and kills all the zombies in that row. So even if you're about to fail multiple times, all of those failures have gone away, and you've lost a lawnmower, so that can't happen again in that row. Yeah, row. But it can happen again in every other row. And so that's a failure spectrum. It makes you feel like you're on the brink of failure when you're not, which then the advantage of that is you don't hit frustration very often, but you do always feel like, oh, I've really got to make this work. Tunable and risky. Always feel you can do better next time. These two are probably too big of a topic to really explain right now, but tunable means that it is possible to tweak the game's difficulty by, say, 5% up or down by turning. You've got some dials you can turn. So a game like Hades, all the enemy attacks are telegraphed. How long between it being telegraphed and it actually happening is something you could very finely fine-tune, and it would dramatically affect the difficulty. Well, it would affect the difficulty. And so if you halved it, you would have a huge effect on the difficulty. If you reduced it by 5%, it would have an effect on the difficulty. You could fine-tune it. And risky means that it's if you failed to do something in the game that you wanted to do, for example, win a run of a roguelike, or maybe just achieve more than you did last time, in a risky game, you always feel like, damn it, give me one more go, I could do it. Like, either because of skill, of a bit of random chance, maybe just the way that an enemy behaved was different this time. There's risk, whereas a completely figured out, like, deterministic game, say chess against a completely deterministic AI, you might learn something, and you might have a reason to think you could, if I played differently, I could have a different outcome. But there's an advantage, there's an upside to a game just being risky in the sense of like, I think if I just give it another go, I'll do better, without necessarily using some new upgrade or anything like that. There are virtues to that I won't go into in depth here because I just don't have time. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. So that's what I'm going for next time. who knows if this is the right formula. It feels like about 70% of this is probably his core DNA for me as a designer, and 30% is just stuff that's on my mind right now because of limitations I hit with Breach Wizards or just things that I'm impatient to sort of get back to. But yeah, this is going to be what's high on my mind when making the next game.